everybody. Thank you so much for joining back in with us as we continue our study on handling adversity. And this is a topic that I think will hit everybody. You know, there's some sermons, there's some lessons, or some things that might be taught on that maybe is not applicable for that time period, but handling adversity is always something for everyone and something that we could always be thinking about. Joe Perticum was preaching at our church last night, and he said that you're either in a storm, you're coming out of a storm, or you're heading into one, because trouble is everywhere. And, you know, last week we talked about the qualifications for adversity. And what that qualification is that you're born of a woman. You know, you see that here in Job chapter number 14, verse number 1. Man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. That's the most believable scripture ever, because, I mean, it literally, you know, your life passes by so quickly, but yet it's so full of trouble in the things that happen in your life. When you read here in, let's see here, Luke chapter number 17, verse number 1, it says, "Then said he unto the disciples, It is impossible, but that offenses will come. But woe unto him through whom they come." So we know for a fact that, you know, we saw in Job chapter number 5 as well last week that, you know, trouble is like dust. The moment you get rid of it, it comes right back again. It's like, man, I literally just got rid of the dust and now it's back. And that's the way trouble is in our life. It's constantly appearing. It's constantly around. And we talked about the qualifications for that. And not everything happens just because of bad reasons. You know, sometimes things just happen. But what I wanted to do today when talking about how to handle adversity, we talked about the qualifications for adversity. You know, you're born, so you're going to have adversity if you're born. That just happens to everybody. But today I want to talk about the reasons for adversity. I want to get into later in following weeks the responses to adversity, so I'm not going to hit on that today. And then the rewards after adversity. And so I want to talk about these different things. Hopefully they'll be a help to you. Hopefully the first podcast of this series was a help to you. But I want to get in today the reasons for adversity and why we deal with some of the trouble that we deal with. Number one, I would say, is the consequences of our sin, consequences of our choices, of our action. And we see that in James chapter number 1. This proof hardly needs any biblical proof at all, because we know that we all have consequences to our actions and the choices that we make. James chapter number 1, verse number 14, it says, "But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." So there's consequences behind the sin, behind the lust that we have. I mean, Romans chapter number 6, "For the wages of sin is death." So your payment for the sin you're storing up is death. So there's consequences behind the decisions that we make. And we know that when you're driving, as Joe said it last night, you try to drive efficiently places and you're driving over the speed limit and you get pulled over. Obviously, there's a consequences to breaking the law. And so you're going to have that as far as, okay, you become an alcoholic and you drink, and then next thing you know, you have liver problems. You sleep with someone and you have a child, and now next thing you know, you're paying child support. There's things that happen in our life that are consequences of our actions, and there's things that we're reaping. That's what the Bible says: you will reap what you sow. And so we have consequences. I remember when me and Pastor were in the office and someone came up here for counseling, and they said, "I have no money. I need money. I need y'all to help me with money." And so he sat down, Pastor did, and he started going through his budget, and he was just paying for ridiculous things. He had no money for it. He was just constantly just throwing money everywhere, paying for everything that he saw. And he's like, "No wonder you don't have no money. This is why you're in the hole that you're in, because you just keep irresponsibly paying for things that you have no money for, getting loans and paying for things that you do not need." And I know a lot of people like that. I mean, I'm one of those people myself. But then we wonder why we're in the predicament that we're in, because it's consequences to the decisions and choices that we make. And a lot of times we would just rather live by what we want than what we need. And sometimes we could put ourselves in a predicament to where we're facing the consequences that we have. And it's not necessarily, we don't need to look at God every time we do something or something bad happens and say, "God, why did you allow this to happen? Why did you do this?" A lot of times it is our own decisions to the actions that we have. And so and you got to think about it. God did not intend for there to be adversity on this earth. When you think about how God started, and this is the way he intends for it to be again, God started in the Garden of Eden where there was no adversity, there was no trouble and bad things happening, but man brought about the sin. Romans 5:12, I'm trying to remember it, wherefore it was by one man sin came into the world and death by sin. So by our actions we brought this. This is not God's fault. God did not intend for this, and there's coming a day where he's going to bring peace and harmony, and he's going to be the ruler, and he's going to bring all of this back to fruition and back to a fantastic place. So we see consequences is one, and you see even Psalm 51, David, he sees Bathsheba on the rooftop. They end up being together, and they have a child who then passes away, and then his household ends up going through a bunch of things because of the bad decision that he made. Consequences to our actions. That's one of the reasons why we deal with adversity. But also, I want you to notice number 2, the curse. The curse. Romans chapter number 8, if you will. Give me just 1 second here as I turn over here. I've been turning to many passages here today. Romans chapter number 8. We see here in Romans chapter number 8 that in verse number 22, for we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. And so we see that the whole world, that's why do you think we have volcanoes and tornadoes and deformities and cancers and all these different things? It's because of the curse. God didn't intend for it to be this way, but a lot of the craziness that we deal with in this world today is just because of the curse and some of the things that we have to deal with because of sin. And I was talking about the James before this, but everything is a result of sin, the adversity that we face, whether it's you taking a harmful decision and action which affects other people, but also other people living in sin, making a decision that affects you. You have people that are being drunk drivers that then get in a wreck and they affect other people for the rest of their lives. You have you making a decision where I'm going to do this where we feel like it affects no one, when in reality it always affects someone, and it always just messes with other people's lives. And we get mad a lot of times at God out of all of these things and say, God, why would you allow this to happen? But God can't just mess with everybody's free will every time something bad happens. This is a sin-filled world that we have brought in, and this is our decisions. God never wanted it to be this way, but a lot of times we blame God for things that we do. And if God was to stop one thing, even if you were to sin in a small matter in our eyes, whether it's sleeping around, whether it's just drinking, whether it's we say murder is bad, and why would God ever allow someone like that to live or to still be in existence? But we still do things selfishly every single day, and we still do things that cause and affect other people's lives. God can't just mess with everybody's free will because we all do stupid stuff. And so, that's one of the reasons why we have adversity, consequences to our actions. But the curse, we know that all creation groans, but also things happen by chance. We talked about it, Ecclesiastes 9:11. Things happen because they just happen. It has nothing to do with anything or a specific reason at times, but things just happen by chance, is what Ecclesiastes 9 says. And so we see, and we talked about how Jesus, literally, God looked down and said, you're my son in whom I am well pleased. And then for the next 40 days, he's tempted and messed with by the devil, but he was in God's perfect will. Abraham, Genesis chapter number 12, God says, I'm going to make thee fruitful and a great nation. And God said, I want you to leave this place and go into another place. And the moment he did that, a famine happened. Now, that does not mean that he wasn't in God's will. Sometimes things just happen by chance and that they go through things. Job did not do anything to deserve what he went through in the book of Job. Those things were happening to him, but not because he did anything. But the outside looking in, we say, man, something must have happened. He must have lived in sin, and he must have did this, he must have did that, when in reality, he didn't do anything at all. Those things happen by chance in his life. And so we see things that happen by consequences, curse, chance, sometimes by chance. But I see also in John chapter number 9, another reason why things happen or adversity happens is to see Christ glorified. To see Christ glorified. John chapter number 9, there's a man that comes to Jesus, and in John chapter number 9, he's a blind man, and as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? You see, we automatically make assumptions. We automatically have a filter of the way we view life through, just like Job's friends, where we look at a situation and say, because something bad has happened, they must have done something. When in reality, sometimes things just happen, but Jesus goes on to tell you why this happened. Verse number 2, and his disciples ask him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And then Jesus answered, Neither had this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. The whole reason why this man was blind is for Christ to be glorified through these things. And so a lot of times when we're going through adversity, we're dealing with things in our life, we ought to, sometimes those things are to glorify God through. Because when people look at the suffering and say, man, if someone that could deal with what they're dealing with still go through that and still glorify God, that just sheds so much light to the world around to say, hey, if they can serve God despite going through that, because a lot of times adversity, things that happen in our lives, they get people so off track. When one minor thing happens, one inconvenience happens, people just go off the course, they go off the rails. But when they look at someone who says, man, despite all these things that I've gone through, I'm still serving God because God is worthy to be praised. And he just to allow me to be saved. I'm not going to a devil's hell. I get all the many blessings. He's the Holy Spirit's inside my heart. I get to go to heaven where there's coming a day where I'm not dealing with this body, this flesh. And I was talking to a man the other day who has diabetes, and he has all these health problems that he's dealing with. And he's so excited about the day that the Lord's going to come back. And it says, when he shall appear, we shall be like him. And to be able to be, there's sometimes adversity happens because of consequences, because of chance, because of the curse. But sometimes things happen because Christ wants to be glorified in them. So we see Christ glorified, but also we see that another reason for adversity is to conforming to be like Christ. I don't know if you realize it, but when you're in your comfort zone, you're not going to change. You're not changing. A lot of times there's things that have to come into your life to get your attention, to get you uncomfortable, to be able to go further than you would ever have before. In Romans chapter number 8, being conformed to his image, Romans chapter number 8, verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose, for whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Us going through these things, the whole end goal of Christ is for us to be in the image of him and to be just like him. And so as we're going through these different things, we're learning how to grow. James chapter number 1 literally says, let me turn to it. James chapter number 1 and verse number 2 through 4, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. In verse number 2, I missed verse number 2. This is a verse that a lot of people want to miss. This is, my brother, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations. You see that the pastor made mention the other day, he circled when you fall into divers temptations, not if. Because we're all going to go through troubles, we're all going to go through trials, and we're all going to deal with these things. But we should allow these things to conform us to be more like Christ, and because, like I said before, we're never going to change to be more than what we can be unless we go through things in our life. Romans 5:3, it says, and not only so, but we glory in tribulations, also knowing that the tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope, and hope maketh not ashamed. So things that we're going through gives us an opportunity to grow. Whenever someone cuts you off in traffic, whenever someone deals with you the way that they shouldn't deal with you, you have a chance to stop and say, I'm going to be more of a patient person. I'm going to handle this like Christ would handle this. Opportunities, we always pray for patience. We always pray for all these different things. And then God doesn't give us patience. He gives us the opportunity to be patient. And I know we don't like that, but God gives us a chance to, just like Peter said, but grow in the grace and knowledge. Every time he gives us another chance with that grace, we ought to grow and to be more and more like him. and take every opportunity that the next time we deal with that same thing, we should be growing past the things that normally would get us frustrated or upset. We should the next time say, you know what, I'm going to handle this better this time, and continually try to grow. So we see consequences. Adversity can come because of consequences of our actions. The curse, by chance, sometimes Christ glorifying and conforming us to be more like Christ. But also, I want you to notice as well that adversity and some things can come in our life sometimes because of chastisement. You know, Hebrews 12:6 says that whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. And there's sometimes that there's things that God's doing to get our attention. I know Dylan, one of my great friends, Dylan, he was out of church, not living for God. And he had a girlfriend he thought he was going to get married to. He had a car. He had this great job, but he was living for himself. And he knew that he was supposed to get back on track. And literally all in 1 week, he lost his car, he lost his girl, and he lost his job. And it all got him his attention back to God, where he came back to church, and he's been in church ever since, where God gave him a better car, a better job, and a wife. And so God sometimes will do things in your life when you know you shouldn't be living that way. He'll get your attention, but it's not because he's trying to keep you from things. He has something way better planned for you whenever you get back on track with God. So these are some different things. These are reasons for adversity. But more important than the source of adversity, I think our response to adversity is way more important. The way that we respond when bad things happen, I say this all the time, life is not what happens to you, but how you react to what happens to you. And a lot of times we get so worried about where is this coming from? Why would God allow this to happen? Instead of having, and we're going to talk about perspective in the podcast episodes to come, but instead of looking at the source, why not look at and focus on our response? Because it doesn't matter if it's consequences to our actions. It doesn't matter if Christ is trying to be glorified. It doesn't matter if it's the curse. If it's any of these things that's happening, we should always seek to glorify God in all of it and to have the right response, because not only is God watching, but people are watching, and we can continue to be a great example, because trouble is always going to happen. But are we going to continue to just get frustrated every time something bad happens? Or do we change our perspective to say, there's a reason why this is happening, and I'm going to grow through this. I'm going to become more patient. I'm going to become more like Christ. And these are great things for me to be an example for God, instead of allowing it just to frustrate me and to get upset with God. I'm going to look at this as a way to respond right to adversity. So I just wanted to show you today that the reasons for adversity, some things of why adversity might come into our life. But next week, I'm going to discuss the responses to adversity, some different people throughout the Bible and how they responded. And then I'm going to get into the rewards after adversity. And hopefully this podcast series so far has been a blessing to you. And we look forward to you joining us again here soon. Thank you so much for your time.